You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Franco Luna Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News. In this episode,
actually in the late 1800s and early 1900s, ang Pateros at saka ang Taguig halos nag-iisang local government. And even Pasig, there was a time na iisa ang Pateros, Taguig and Muntinlupa, and the seat of government is in Pateros.
hindi pa pala tapos ang boxing when it comes to the battle over the Bonifacio Global City. Let's talk about the quiet and smallest third party in the fight for prime lands of Fort Bonifacio and the EMBO barangays transitioning out of Makati.
In the early 90s, Pateros was declared to be an independent municipality. So ang land area natin originally ay 1,040 hectares. Hanggang Fort Bonifacio, sakop yan. Kasi wala pa yung Fort Bonifacio. Hindi pa ginagawang military reservation niya. So nung biglang gawing military reservation, na-reduce tayo ng maliit na maliit.
That's Pateros Mayor Ike Ponce speaking on One News Roundtable with Robbie. Pateros is not only the smallest member of Metro Manila, it's also the last remaining municipality in the NCR. Everybody else from Valenzuela to Muntinlupa and everybody else in between is a city. Three things keep Pateros from being promoted as a city. Unang-una, the number of its residents, the size of its economy, and then the area of the land it occupies. Now, you can grow a population and you have options for growing the economy. Pero yung lupa, paano lalaki yun?
So ito ang medyo may problema kami. Kung tatanungin mo ako kung ano yung pwede ko pang gawin sa Pateros, wala na talaga eh. Dahil kulang talaga. Wala kaming open space na. Yung housing project nga ay wala kaming magawa dahil kulang talaga sa espasyo. So kung titignan mo, is there room for development na pwede mong gawin para ma-develop lalo ang Pateros? Very limited na.
But Pateros wasn't always as small as it is currently. That's the most basic premise to its argument for the BGC. The fact is, Pateros used to be much bigger. Its original boundaries certainly would have qualified it as a city today. If you go back to the Spanish colonial era, in fact, both of what is now Makati and Taguig were part of the municipality of Pateros, which itself was originally a barrio of Pasig, but was granted its own municipality in 1799. In 1900, Pateros was incorporated as a town under the newly created province of Rizal, which was so encompassing it included what we know now as Manila, Marikina, Pasig, Muntinlupa, and yes, Makati, Taguig, and Pateros. The American colonial government would consolidate Pateros with Taguig and Makati. Built in 1909, Pateros regained its independent status. In 1975, it became a part of Metro Manila. By the way, yes, the name Pateros comes from pato or duck, and the duck industry that flourished along the Pateros River. But Mayor Ponce says it actually refers to another industry, one that is now best associated with Marikina.
The name Pateros came from pato and sapatero. Ang Pateros kasi ay lugar din ng gawaan ng sapatos.
Over more than a century, laws, politics, and gerrymandering erase and redraw boundaries, sometimes less clearly than they should. Mayor Ponce says Pateros claims that it first held control over what would become Fort Bonifacio and some of the EMBOs when it became an independent town in 1801, while Taguig asserts that it had jurisdiction over them based on a 1968 presidential decree. Whatever the cities of Taguig, Makati, and Pateros say today, or assert about the future, they do agree on a common past. At least to a point. What we now refer to as the Fort, or as BGC, and what we call the EMBO barangays around it, well, their fates converge to a point in Philippine history, specifically a point during American colonial rule. Most Filipinos are aware that all of that disputed land used to be military grounds. Fort Bonifacio. But before it was Fort Bonifacio, it was actually Fort McKinley, named after former US President William McKinley. And Fort McKinley was home to a number of American military units. It also had a golf course and recreational facilities, and it went on to stand as one of the bases used by the American and Filipino Scouts for 44 years until the Philippines Commonwealth finally gained full independence. After Philippine independence in 1946, Fort McKinley was turned over to the Philippine government. The facility became home of the Philippine Army and later the Philippine Navy. It was renamed Fort Bonifacio in 1957, and the land was later used by the Philippine Army following the proclamation of then-President Carlos P. Garcia. O teka, did you get that? President Carlos P. Garcia, CP Garcia, as in CP Garcia Avenue. Most Filipinos don't make that connection anymore kasi ang tawag na lang natin usually sa CP Garcia Avenue ay C5. The point is, a lot of details get lost as history is written, is the point. And that forgetting, and then the conflicting memories and records, eventually gives birth to problems. Which brings us back to the lands of the fort and the EMBO barangays. Taguig's case versus Makati was built on a simple assertion. The land in dispute were all under a contiguous jurisdiction of Pateros Taguig, or Taguig Pateros, when the occupying US government delineated it in 1901 as a military base. Taguig won its case against Makati, we know that. But Pateros claims in its separate case that Fort Bonifacio and the EMBO areas were specifically carved from its side of the former Taguig Pateros configuration. And on that score, Mayor Ponce says Pateros is actually making headway.
Well, of course, because we have a pending case to claim our lost territory, part of the BGC at saka itong mga 7 EMBO barangay ng Fort Bonifacio, na recently, last April, ay nanalo kami, yung certiorari namin sa Supreme Court ay nanalo.
EMBO, by the way, is an acronym that reflects its military lineage. EMBO stands for Enlisted Men's Barrios. These barrios were residential areas set aside for families of enlisted military personnel. Today, and specifically in the case between Makati and Taguig, the EMBOs refer to 10 barangays that will transition from the jurisdiction of one city to another. As Pateros Mayor Ponce said, their claim is for 7 of those barangays, and then for Fort Bonifacio. For the 2 cities and the 1 municipality, it's easy to see what's at stake. In the late 1980s, the Philippine government started the process to privatize Fort Bonifacio. The land was parceled out for military housing, but more largely for commercial development. It gave birth to the fort, a gleaming and modern business and commercial district rivaling the Philippines' long-standing financial center, the Makati Central District, just across EDSA. The tax revenues, employment, and business activities the fort generates represents a windfall to the winning city, or a suddenly huge hole in the pocket to the loser. But taken with the EMBOs, the area also represents a lot of citizens, which is to say, voters. But for Pateros especially, winning jurisdiction over the fort and the EMBOs would mean instant cityhood, at least on paper. It could satisfy all minimum requirements for population, size of its economy, and total land area. Heto si Mayor Ponce ng Pateros.
Under the local government code kasi, meron 3 requirements for a local government to become a city from a municipality. First is the income, second is the population, third is the land area. In all 3 requirements, hindi kami qualified eh. Una, yung income, hindi pa namin nare-reach yun. Secondly, yung population, wala pa rin. At yung
ano po ba
land
population
area,
ngayon ng Pateros?
ang population ng Pateros ngayon ay nasa mga 70 to 75,000. Ang kailangan natin, 150,000 para maging city tayo.
The 10 EMBO barangays taken together, they represent more than 200,000 residents. We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, we'll tell you about Pateros' journey to cityhood and whether the Fort Bonifacio area and the other cities vying for it stand in that journey.
I mean, if the maps are true and the documents are true, the historical claim of Pateros might, I mean, at least, provide them some gains if they do. I mean,
And that would mean a lot for Metro Manila's lone municipality. This is Rafael Montes. He is a researcher at the UP Center for Local and Regional Governance.
Pateros is barely 2 square kilometers. But the population density there is maybe 30,000 plus per square kilometer. Because ang liit nga nung land area nila, pero they're smack in the middle of Metro Manila. So the urbanization that's going on in Pasig, Taguig, and Makati has already gone into Pateros.
That should translate to residential taxes and spillover economic activity. But Paeng says for Pateros, there is something else to gain beyond taxes and land. Being a city rather than a municipality does come with its perks. Cities have more options and more power to determine the use of its resources.
For at least Pateros to enjoy all the privileges of what it is to be a city. I mean, Pateros doesn't remit to a province, right, with regard to their real property tax because, I mean, it's an NCR LGU. But I suppose their rates are limited. They cannot really adjust their tax rates, their service fees to a city level sort of imposition because they're still this unique municipality.
Of course, Paeng, like all of us, take note of the most recent High Court ruling that dominated the headlines.
The Supreme Court has said that it's the dispute between Makati and Taguig that's final.
But Pateros Mayor Ike Ponce says that the Supreme Court decision is only final with respect to the case between Makati and Taguig. The thing is, Mayor Ponce says, Pateros' less-known challenge is a different and separate matter altogether that the courts have yet to settle.
So it's not final against Pateros because we are not a party to that case. Pero ito, hindi applicable sa amin because we were never a party to that case. So according to that decision, ang sabi ng Supreme Court, ibalik niyo sa Regional Trial Court and let Pateros present their evidence. Ay very confident naman tayo. Magandang ebidensya natin.
Meanwhile, there is a lot already to figure out and thresh out as Taguig and Makati comply with the Supreme Court ruling on their case. Makati Mayor Abby Binay says it is not just about taxes, businesses, and voters. From the perspective of citizens, everything from healthcare to education will be affected.
Paano na ngayon sila? Nababahala ako para sa mga may sakit na inaaruga sa aming mga health centers at sa ospital ng Makati. Silang nabibigyan ng mga benepisyo at dekalidad pero libreng serbisyong pangkalusugan na tanging sa Makati lang matatanggap. Paano na ngayon sila? Nababahala ako para sa mga minamahal kong senior citizen na taon-taon ay tumatanggap ng cash allowance at iba pang benepisyo para maitawid ang kanilang pangangailangan na tanging Makati lang ang nakakatugon. Paano na ngayon sila? Sila ang aking mga inaalala. Para akong nawalan ng mga anak, magulang, lolo at lola. Sila ang mga inaaruga at inaalagaan ko sa simula't simula.
Taguig's Mayor Lani Cayetano acknowledges it from their side as well.
Maraming katanungan, agam-agam, pangamba, lalo na sa mga barangay na dati ay sakop ng Makati. Gusto ko po na ipahayag bilang mayor ng Taguig na wala sa aming intensyon ang may maantala na serbisyo publiko sa mga barangay na dati ay sakop ng Makati.
And as for the municipality next to Taguig, well, Mayor Ike Ponce says they will have the same interests of their people in mind if and when they ever have to make that transition, this time from Taguig to neighboring Pateros. And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was edited by Freddy Blanco, our Teka Teka News executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior editor is Veronica Uy. If you liked this episode, please do share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Thanks for listening.